Okay, so we'll make a start. So thank you to everyone for joining us today in the Next in Our Leaders Live series. And today, as you're all aware, is focused upon reading and reading for life, where we're going to be talking with our guest speaker, Adam Lancaster, around building a strong reading culture in schools. So if I could just have the next slide, please, Adam, that would be great. Okay, so just while we're getting the slides up and running, just do a little bit of Q&A and just some housekeeping. So if you have any questions, then please pop them in the chat. What we'll tend to do is we will come to them at the end of the session, because we want everyone to continue to listen to Adam and the great thing that he's going to be talking to us about today. And then what we'll do is we'll try and collate them at the end, potentially into possible themes. And then any that we don't manage to get through, we will address in our follow-up material that you will get after the webinar. So we've got with us today, we've got Adam Lancaster, who is one of our leading literacy experts, and he's going to talk to us about the things that have had a great impact in his own school and about the things that really focus their minds around building that strong reading culture in school, and hopefully bring some takeaways for all of us this morning. I've equally got Steve Long, who's one of my colleagues here at ESS, and he's going to be helping me in the background with the chat and the Q&A. So we're all here today because we know that reading is one of the foundations of everything that we're trying to achieve in the education system, and that's starting with very early reading, taking into account phonics and oracy and all of those really important early milestones. So I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And as I say, if you've got anything that you'd like to add into the chat, then please do. And Adam, it's over to you.
Right, lovely. Thank you very much indeed for that fantastic introduction. The slides seem to be working. There was a little bit of a glitch there. Hannah, I think maybe you're running the slides at the moment. Let me see if I can just do that. So, good morning. What a fantastic thing to be able to talk about, something that I could probably spend literally a whole day talking about, but we don't have a whole day. We do have just a small amount of time, so I'm going to try and squeeze as much information as I can into the time that we have. Now, it's one of those things that actually it's a shame that we're in the position that we're in, where we're realistically having to have this kind of discussion, because you think in 2025 we would really be able to say that reading is part of everything that we do in schools, is part of everything that we see in schools. And I'm pretty sure that everyone that's here listening today and that is in the kind of the chat and everything sees reading as something themselves that is really important, knows the impact that it has in their schools, knows the benefit of students being able to read, to love reading. And so unfortunately, it's not something that everybody sees. And whether that's, past education policies, teacher training, lack of evidence maybe of the impact, or whatever the multitude of other reasons, we do find ourselves in this position. However, there are positive things nationally happening. That does mean that we are in a position where we can do things and we can improve upon what's going on, and we're going to look at some of those things today. Now, kind of creating and developing a culture and then maintaining it, it's a really big question, and there are no quick wins, there are no easy fixes, there are no things that you can do very, very quickly and then be like, yeah, that's it, we've solved it. And you sort of have to remember as well that with something like this, you've never done it, you've never finished, you've never got success, because even if you do start to create that culture, things change. Schools are in flux all of the time. We get new cohorts of students every year, staff change, we get different things that factor into education from higher up. We have our own context and our own differing needs. And all of those things impact on what we do. So I'm not going to be able to give any quick fixes in this talk. It's going to be more about how you can go about producing something that has that long-term goal, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be about long-term. It's going to be about moving forward, and how you can do that. But it's important to remember that people that are in this room, no one is starting from scratch. No one is starting from zero. There's things already happening in your school. And sometimes it's about recognizing those. It's about tying those things together and making sure that there is a more cohesive foundation of what you're doing. So what we're going to look at today, and what I'm going to be talking about, is how you can kind of, from that strategic perspective, look at what goes on, what happens, and how you can produce something and work towards something that is producing that culture of reading within your school. So it's kind of be like a zoomed out version, realistically, of what reading and creating that whole idea and ethos of a culture can look like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a lot of the journey that I've done in my school, conversations I've had when I go into other schools as well, and how you can maybe take some of those ideas on and utilize those, as well as looking at what you already do to create that ethos. And it's important to realize that not everything will work in every school. You know, we're all different. We all have different contexts, like I said, and it's about understanding what your context is. And I think that's one of the main points that I want to bring out throughout today, is understanding where you are already, understanding what you do already, and understanding what your school needs of you, because it's going to be slightly different. You know, different schools are going to have different needs. They're going to be doing different things already, but it's about how you can develop that. So I think if we could move on in the slides. It says I have control, but unfortunately it doesn't look like I do. So if we could go on, that would be great. And what I want to look at in particular after this slide is that national picture that we had from the National Literacy Trust. So they produced this report, and I'm sure all of you have seen it. I'm sure all of you have read it as well. They produced this report last year. It's something that they do on a year-to-year basis. And looking at the data in there, it was unfortunately really stark and not a great picture from what we were seeing. You know, looking at the fact that reading for pleasure is desperately declining across basically all the schools that were taking part, and it is that national picture, you know, lowest reading enjoyment levels since 2005. The unfortunate thing, during and immediately post COVID, and you know, COVID must have an impact somewhere around all of this, but we did start to see that actually young people were reading more during COVID and immediately after. They were building those habits of reading. Yes, there was a bigger gap between those students that were in our vulnerable groups and those students that weren't, kind of the more affluent groups who had access to books, who had access to reading during COVID. They kind of soared and they excelled. And there was a bigger gap then between those students that weren't, that was sort of maybe in our free school meal picture and other vulnerable groups. And after COVID, a lot of money was put into providing schools with intervention and ability to help those kind of vulnerable groups to pick themselves up. However, what we've actually seen is those students that were, and those young people that were reading during and immediately post-COVID and setting up those habits, we haven't taken advantage of that. And what's actually happened is they've completely dropped off. Now, there could be a number of reasons for it. It could be in schools, the fact that, you know, we've suddenly had to really cram a lot more content in for those young people, you know, to try and fill those education gaps. And maybe because of that, reading has taken a lot more of a backseat and building upon the things that we had just immediately post-COVID from that slight increase in reading as well. And what's happened is those young people have dropped down, you know, and it is a leveling down picture that we've seen rather than a leveling up picture, which is obviously incredibly sad for us to be able to see, and something that we would rather was not the case, and that we can do something about as well. If we move on, that would be great. You know, some of the data that we were seeing and that we've seen from this report is stuff that we already know. We've already seen this in schools. We've already know that there's a gap between boys and girls and their reading. We already know that there's a massive drop off and decline when students hit, you know, that 13, 14 to 16 age range. But what we're seeing now is those gaps between girls and boys reading is getting bigger. We're seeing that the decline of those age ranges are getting more so. And that's not necessarily, well, that's definitely not a picture that we want to see. We want to make sure that young people are accessing reading, are able to read, and ultimately are enjoying reading as well. You'll see on the next slide that the way in which the journey that people are using in reading, and the fact that reading has such a big impact on academic achievement is clear for all of us to see. You know, if you work in reading, if you work in education, we've always known this, we've always seen this, and the data backs it up and says, you know, if students are enjoying reading, then they're going to do better academically in school. And realistically, if you think about it, that's obvious. If you enjoy reading, you're going to do more of it. If you do more of it, you're going to be improving your literacy skills. So of course you're going to be doing academically better. But it's something that actually we can now use and we can utilize going forward. It's also interesting to see that there are a lot more things from the government telling us and showing us that they also recognize this more. So when I said, you know, obviously at the beginning, we're in a bad place in terms of looking at these schools, we're also in a good place in the fact that people like Ofsted are now starting to understand, are starting to put reading, you know, higher up the agenda, to talk about it, to show us what we should be doing. There's more research out there. You know, there's a lot more research around things like reading fluency in schools and the importance of reading fluency. You know, there are programs now that are specified towards secondary schools for teaching phonics, something that we've never had before. It's something that's very, very difficult for secondary schools to be able to grasp. On the next slide, what we've got is we've got the National Literacy Trust to set up a number of different recommendations as to what they think should be happening. And these are all really, really good. But these are also national things. And what we want to be looking at today is we want to be looking at more what we can do in schools. So moving on from here and moving on from what the National Literacy Trust has been saying in their report and what the evidence shows is that actually it's really important for us to be able to build that reading culture in school. You know, as I said, Ofsted have produced reports such as Now the Whole School is Reading, you know, and that sets out really clear points as to what we should be doing in schools and the things that we can achieve. You know, it identifies points of we should make sure that we know who our weak readers are, you know, that bottom 20%. We should be providing interventions for those students. We should be sharing information about reading and about reading ability with all of our staff so that they are aware in the classroom, and we should track the progress. Reports such as Telling the Story, again, an Ofsted report, which is an English focused one, covers lots around reading. We've got lots from the Education Endowment Fund, loads and loads of toolkits that we're able to utilize, and lots of online educators, people like Alex Quigley, writing lots of books, lots of research around different aspects. So moving on from there, what we want to be looking at and what we want to be creating is that long-term culture. And as I said before, it's not quick fixes. It's not one-off events to showcase reading. We're talking about fundamental changes at the core of our schools. You know, reading shouldn't just exist, you know, in one space, or shouldn't just be the purview of the English department or in an English lesson. It realistically should be everywhere. So moving on from here, what we should be looking at is how we can build those foundations and make sure that reading is fully incorporated into everything we do. When I go into schools, what I say to schools, and when we're looking about reading in particular, is if I walk around any classroom, any part of your school, I talk to any student, how do I know that reading exists? And when we then break it down and we look at how you create that and how you go about making sure that that is something that is in the fabric of the school, I kind of look at trying to make it as easy as possible, because it's not easy realistically. It's actually very, very difficult. But if you can break it down as simply as you can, then it makes it easier to move forward. So I'd look at these three main points. So the interdisciplinary approach, looking at the curriculum, how things work across departments and across subjects, looking at skill development, and then looking at the engagement and the motivation of young people, of parents, and of staff as well. Basically, what we're trying to produce is students who can read, students who read for learning, students who read for enjoyment, and then students who just read more. And hopefully they all link together, as do all of these points as well. So looking at the next point, one of the things when we're looking at this interdisciplinary approach is looking at how reading can exist in the classrooms that we have. You know, every department has reading going on. Everyone. There is reading in every single classroom that happens in your school. And that's where my point of, with no one starting at scratch, there are things that are already happening. You know, to be able to access so much learning, students have to be able to read. So how do we utilize this? How do we recognize this? And how do we coordinate this as well? In my opinion, it's not just about you or the person that's in charge of reading or literacy in school. You need to build and you need to bring in other people into that as well. You know, when we talk about this interdisciplinary approach and we're talking about across departments, the people that are going to make it happen are your staff, are the teachers within a school. You know, looking at the next slide, I've kind of utilized the picture of a conductor in an orchestra. You know, it's basically what we're thinking about, and what we're using is understanding that your role is to conduct all of those things that are going on. And it's about utilizing those teachers that are in those classrooms and their expertise. And that's the important thing, is they are the experts in their subjects. They are the experts in their own classroom. And by putting the onus onto them and empowering them, that's a really important thing to do. So one of the things that I did when I was trying to set this up and trying to create that understanding of this ethos and this culture was I asked our departments to spend some time, and obviously this comes from being able to have, you know, the leadership team buying into this. That's like the number one thing, and that's something that, you know, we could spend a whole other session talking about, but this is important. So realistically, it should be stuff that your senior leadership teams buy into. So I asked for time with the departments. I ran a session for them asking what I wanted from them, and I put the onus onto them. I put the experience that they had at the forefront of everything that was going to happen and was going to go on. And this formulated as part of basically an audit. We were doing at the same time, we were looking at our curriculum mapping. And this is another important point, tie things into things that are already going on, already happening. Reading isn't just that extra thing. Reading is part of what's going on. And if you think like that and you see like that, you do notice then those opportunities that exist. So on the next slide, you can see that what I've got is I've just got a really simple audit for departments to be able to undertake. And this is what I asked them to do. I said, in your department times with your teachers, and you're looking at all of the curriculum and your curriculum mapping that you're doing, look at where reading already exists. Think about what you're utilizing in terms of your reading, and I want you to jot it down. And what they were doing, they were having really good conversations around reading and who used what, and they were starting to share within their departments the things that each of them were doing, which was really great to see. And what it meant was that they were also able to identify maybe where they had gaps. And again, that was really important. I asked them to be able to identify those things, to make notes of them. When they specifically were using text, I also asked them, can you make a note of those? I want to make sure that our library is stocked with that information as well. So if you're telling students to go and read them, we can provide that information for them as well. So it started to work together, and it started to link together by utilizing what was already happening and by putting the expertise of the teachers who were teaching in the classroom these aspects. That made it buy-in from the teachers really, really important aspect of what was going on. And what that then allowed us to do on the next slide is it allowed us to be able to show these things in a slightly sort of nicer way, and a way to be able to sell it to staff, other departments, to share what was going on between different departments so they could see the links and what other departments were doing and where it linked to theirs. And it also meant that we were able to share this with parents and the students as well, to show them what was happening. And whilst we were doing that, we were also asking the staff, what are the aspects of reading and the skills within reading that you see as really important? Because each subject will have their own sort of discipline in terms of that. They will have their own key skills when it comes to reading that they want students to be able to know. You know, it might link when you get to Key Stage 4 or Key Stage 5 about being able to answer exam questions, or it might be all the way back down into primary school. What are the exact key skills that we're looking for within, you know, a history lesson that students need to be able to access? Within a maths lesson, you know, there's so much reading that goes on in maths. How and what are the skills that we need students to be able to see and understand? And then on the next slide, what we've then got is the way that we can show this and be able to kind of show the journey that exists within reading. And another thing that we were doing at the same time was we were providing this reading journey to our students by highlighting key books, key texts, key fiction and key non-fiction that linked into what they were studying topic-wise at the exact time of year that it was happening, so that they're able then to access that, they're able then to support their own learning, and they're able to see that reading is an important aspect of their education life because it's embedding within what's going on. And in the classroom, teachers were talking about these texts. Teachers were thinking about the texts that they were using when they were doing their planning and the reason why they were using them, and how that would then specifically link into what they were trying to get their students to know, to understand, and to improve upon. So reading starts to become then an important part of the learning process, an important part of the planning process for staff, and an important part of the learning process for the students as well. So onto the next slide, what we were able to do from that is then think about those skills. So where we were asking staff and teachers and putting the expertise again on them, we were asking them to say, what are the key skills that you need your students to know? What is it that you need them to be able to develop in terms of their reading in your curriculum? And they were able then to provide us with that. This is exactly in an English lesson what we need them to be able to do. In a history lesson, we need them to be able to do this. And as I said, we were able to share that information between our departments so that we started to see where there were links and when there were slight differences. And it's then about making that explicit to the students. And because the teachers and the staff were being able to see that, it meant that they were more explicit in their teaching with it as well. And when we talk about skills development, it's those two sides of things. So, you know, we think, you know, in education, 80% of what we do in schools is the curriculum, realistically. So a lot of that has to happen within the curriculum. But also what we also need to be able to provide is for those 20%, that bottom 20% of our cohort who struggle with reading, we also need to be able to develop their specific reading skills as well. So we want to be able to have the curriculum side, but then we also want to be able to have the intervention side where we're identifying those students who are weaker and then being able to then provide them with the right intervention to support them, but also to be able to share that knowledge with staff as well. So staff in the classroom are able to know who of their students struggles, because that's really important. They need to know that information, because if they have that information, then they're able to adapt what they're doing and the teaching that they're giving and how they can make sure that those students are reaching their potential when reading is happening in the classroom, as reading does happen in all classrooms. But it also means then for those students that they are able to access what's going on in the classroom. They are able to be able to take part, and they're able to maximize their learning in the curriculum and within the classroom as well. So on the next slide, and the empowerment of staff, I can't underplay how important that is. You know, having that buy-in from staff, and it not just being one person telling everyone what they have to do, having the staff buy into it, understand why it's important, but also by making them the expert in all of this, it empowers them within their own teaching to understand how they can get the best out of their students as well. And so from all of that information, you know, these posters, other schools have done exactly the same. And it's an idea that we've been able to bring in. And what we've done specifically with them is we've had the teachers themselves design them to say exactly what they think a social scientist reads like. Someone that's in a drama lesson, what are the things that they need to do? A musician. It's all slightly different from other departments, but there's also some similarities as well. And like I said, having that link and being able to have departments take control, show what they want to show, and do what they want to do with the students because they know what's going to get the best out of them has been really, really important and really fundamental. And because there are examples going on all over the place already within your curriculum, it's just about tying all of those things together. So empowering staff, putting the onus on their expertise, looking at what opportunities already exist, knowing what your own context is really important, because what that allows you to do is it allows you to know what your priorities need to be. So say your bottom 20%, their needs are more around phonics. You're going to have to put in some sort of phonics program for them. Whereas if your need of those students is maybe they, you know, one of the problems that we have the most with some of our students in the bottom is they just don't read enough. So they don't have the reading skills and abilities because they haven't practiced it enough. So it's about trying to employ ways to help them to read more. And all of these aspects within the curriculum, outside of the curriculum that are existing, is just building that culture, that ethos that reading just exists everywhere. It's not just one-off places, it's not just one-off things, it's everywhere. They see it in the corridors, they hear it in the classrooms. It's explicit from when the teachers talk about things and when they're introducing text. For the teachers, they're thinking about why they're using the text. They're knowing the context of their own class and who's going to struggle with what type of text. So they're adjusting that and thinking about that. So it's in their minds when they're planning their lessons as well, because they are the experts. They are the experts of their subjects. And that includes being the expert of reading in their subject as well. So on to the next slide. These are posters, like I said, that are up around school, that appear everywhere, alongside our reading journeys that we have, where I showed you that we identified all of the different texts that we're encouraging young people to read to help with their journey through. And that's what it is. It's a journey. It's not just a one-off thing. It's not just happening at one point. It's about progressing through. And if students can see not just it's happening in this moment, but it's going to happen moving forward throughout my whole time in school, again, that helps to build that ethos and that understanding that reading exists and happens. And when we're talking about that skill development, like I said, the interventions, it's about having that tiered approach. It's about having, you know, an understanding of who the weaker readers are, what their problems are, and what's going to help. And by having that tiered approach, and this is just an example of some of the things that we do. It doesn't have to be, you know, massively intensive. It doesn't have to be loads of things, just things that you know will make a difference to your context because you know what your young people need. On the next slide, after we've looked at the final point is then about that kind of empowerment, engagement and motivation around everyone and everything else outside of the curriculum. Now, from those first 2 points, the interdisciplinary approach, looking at the skills, all of those things will be having an impact on this as well, because students will be able to access text, they will be able to read better because of what we're doing in terms of improving their skills and their abilities. We will also be making sure that they're reading more because they're accessing more texts within the lessons. Teachers are including it in their planning more because they see the importance of it and they see that they are the expert within it as well. But then what other things can you do that help to build that reading culture? And one of the things that I think is, most schools nowadays have some sort of reward system. It's something that already exists, as we've spoken about before. Look at where there are already opportunities. So for instance, we celebrate certain characteristics within school, being motivated, taking opportunities, being notable. Reading fits into every single one of those. So it's about providing then staff the ability to know if someone is doing reading in this way, they get themselves a motivated one. If they're taking an opportunity to read in a lesson, make it clear to them, be explicit that you're going to give them that reward. It's the same the way they do for any other type of reward in the lesson, and it just brings it in. It makes it something that's happening naturally rather than being an add-on or an extra or something else. Reading then is part of what's happening in school. Sharing information with parents, sharing ideas with parents of how they can support at home, making sure that, in newsletters, in reports that go home to parents, are there aspects of reading that exist in there so parents see that we value reading, that we see the importance of reading within our school, and so because of that, naturally they will as well. And as I said at the very beginning, you're never going to solve it. You're never going to be finished and done and be like, that's it, we can move on now, because it's continually evolving and it's continually moving. And there'll be new things that will happen in your school. For instance, just these last couple of days in our school, we're talking about having an aspirational curriculum. Different things to encourage students to take part in different extracurricular activities within our departments. Straight away, reading can be a massive aspect of that as well, just as any other part can be, because then it's just seen that it's happening with other things that are going on within our school as well. And I think if you can think along those lines, if you can see those opportunities that already exist, because they do, then you're able to put those things into place as well. And I think that goes back to that context, that goes back to understanding what happens in your school and where things are. And I just want to make one final point on the last slide, is we do a reading survey for our students as well, where we look at what they feel around reading. It's quite similar to the National Literacy Trust one as well. And we're always really, really pleased with the results that we get, because it shows that what we're doing is having an impact. It shows that what we are achieving within our school, of having that ethos of being able to provide these opportunities and be able to take these opportunities, does make a difference to our young people as well. So, although the National Literacy Trust national report shows that picture, if you can be doing it in your school and you can see those things making a difference, then that's going to be really key to you being able to achieve that culture and that ethos moving forward. So hopefully there are some ideas that you can take on board from this session. Like I said, context, staff buy-in, opportunities are all really key things for you to be able to identify. And also remember that although it feels like it's a really big job, which it is, and it is a long-term thing, and there are no quick fixes, there are things that are already happening in your schools that you can be really proud of and that you can bring together and tie up to make it a more cohesive whole, rather than lots of different points and parts.
Okay, thank you, Adam. That was excellent. That was really good. Just to summarise, I think really the three areas that you covered around the initially really knowing your context and and the children that are within your school. You know, as educators, that is our number one sort of primary focus anyway, really understanding the children and the families that we're working with. So that's always really important. But then that interdisciplinary approach, and I think that applies, as you mentioned, either in the primary or the secondary setting. It's, you know, often those extra elements of reading, as you said, around the school in the different parts of the curriculum itself that really make that empowering, certainly for the teachers as the experts. And I loved the line of the experts of reading in their subject as well. We say that as educators a lot, don't we, that the teachers are the experts in their subjects, but also the experts of reading in their subjects. That's really powerful if you're a teacher. And I think that is something, if I was still in school, that is certainly something that I would be taking away to my colleagues. And of course, the engagement element, and that sort of brings me to one of the questions that we did have in the Q&A, which was around recommending how to incorporate the use of audio books, both in terms of supporting sort of your cultural curriculum, but on a practical level, how that can be something that can be embedded in your provision, really.
It's a difficult one because obviously, you know, schools have different budgets and different ways of being able to utilize those budgets as well. But, you know, by able to have a range of ways of accessing reading is realistically key. One of the things that we've introduced is technology as much as possible within reading to give young people the ability to see that they can access reading in lots of different ways. And we've empowered our teachers with this as well. So one of the things that we've introduced for staff is to be setting reading homework, reading home learning for young people, where they set it over Microsoft Teams. There's a fluency aspect in there. And the students read an article that's been set by a teacher where the teacher has picked it specifically because it's about the topic that they're studying, and it's really, really, really good and fun and interesting. It's about engaging them through reading, so the students be enthused. And that's exactly the same that you can do with talking books as well. There are so many great talking books. There are so many technological aspects that we have where text can be read in what doesn't sound like a computer voice anymore, with AI and the introduction of AI in so many different aspects. It feels like a more humanistic voice. And I think aspects like that and trying to take on board those things is really useful and really good, because it does engage young people and different types of young people into reading because of its being a different way of doing it.
Okay, thank you. That's a great answer, and I think that encapsulates some of the elements of non-fiction being equally as important in your reading curriculum as the sort of the creative reading that we often do. Apologies, I can hear myself as well, which is quite off-putting. So I think that is the fundamental basis of all the questions that we have in chat. We've had a couple of questions, Adam, around whether resources will be shared and whether you'll be able to pull things together that you're happy to share with the audience this morning, so we can put things together in the follow-up. So I think it's always lovely to be able to give educational specialists some time back that's so precious during the day. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Adam, and our audience this morning. Please join us for the next Leaders Live, which is coming up in May, I believe. So thank you ever so much, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.